Hi. We're going to go over one of the most important sections of material in the course. Our purpose here in this session is to go over some of the concepts which focus on sampling and the idea of a sampling distribution. This is a term we haven't talked about yet in this course, but a sampling distribution is the fundamental concept that allows us to do inferential statistics. So it's taking everything we've learned in the front half of the class, and this becomes the hinge pin around which the class pivots, so that everything we do in the second half of the class is going to be related to the first half of the class through this concept called sampling distribution. So we'll focus on two items. One is the idea of selecting samples in the first place, and we talked about samples versus a population early on. We'll talk about how we go about selecting samples and what are some of the important criteria. And then this introduction to estimation. How is it that we can actually estimate something with any degree of reliability and feel like we know what we're talking about? So that's really the direction where this session of material is going to go. We are now entering the back half of the class. We're talking about sampling distributions at the beginning of our module on statistical inference. And as we dig into that module a little deeper, as you'll see, we are going to talk about the selection of samples. We're going to talk about the introduction to estimation, and those lead directly over to the discussions on confidence intervals, and we'll get into hypothesis testing, our two main tools of inferential statistics that we'll cover in this class. But as you'll see, and we're going to really go the whole step from selecting samples all the way down to the primary model that we'll use for confidence interval, all based around this idea of a sampling distribution. So look for that term as it comes up. I'll repeat, as you know, the things that are important. You'll hear me repeat those over and over. So what are the keys to estimating population parameters from a sample? We're going to cover a variety of topics in this session. We're going to talk about the selection of a sample and various methods that are applied. We will talk about estimation error, ways that we can go wrong when we make an estimate. What are the sources? And we'll give some examples. And then we'll get into this idea of a sampling distribution and hopefully demonstrate what that tells us and focus in on a specific example where we're trying to estimate a population mean from a sample. And we'll do that through something important called the central limit theorem. And we'll introduce the idea of sample size determination. One of the questions, as we talked about samples versus populations, someone was saying earlier, well, the sample has to be big enough. Well, what's big enough? And how is that determined? What is that based on? So we'll see how that comes into play as we go through the course of our discussion. But first of all, I want us to introduce the topic in a broad overview, and we'll do that by way of our video series. This will be one of the longer clips, so maybe it's a good thing that we're not watching this in the classroom where you might be tempted to fall asleep. So sit back, grab a good refreshing beverage or something of that sort. You're familiar with these videos and how thrilling and exhilarating they are. So sit back and spend this next 15 minutes or so looking at some of the key concepts that help us move from just information we might have about one sample to being able to make a claim that is an estimate about where a particular population parameter lies with some level of accuracy. Now, this video is going to take us through a sequence of thoughts, a process really, from selecting a sample all the way through doing the estimation. They'll talk about required sample size, and the video is even going to go all the way through to actually taking us to a basic confidence interval formulation. And what we will see is that where that video ends up is actually going to be our starting point for our discussions when we come back to that shortly. But in the meantime, take a look at this video right now, and then we'll come back and discuss in a lot more detail several of the things that have been covered in the video.